So, welcome back and get ready for another amazing Bible quiz. This one is on the plagues of Egypt. Let's just jump right into it. Do you know all the plagues in Egypt? Number one, which plague turned the Nile River into blood? Was it the first plague? The second plague? The third plague? Or the fourth plague? Which plague turned the Nile River into blood? Ugh! Probably the grossest of the plagues, in my opinion. The first plague. What a way to start it out. The first plague turned the Nile River into blood, causing the fish to die and the water to become undrinkable. Yeah. Imagine waking up to find your main water source looking like a horror movie prop. It was a dramatic start to a series of events that would leave Egypt reeling. Interesting explanation. Number two, which plague brought frogs all over Egypt? Brought frogs. Didn't it rain down frogs? Isn't that what they said? A, the first plague. B, the second plague. C, the fifth plague. Or D, the seventh plague. So we can kind of cross out A, right? We just went over that. We just talked about how the Nile turned into blood. So it's not A. But which one made it rain down frogs? B. Oh man. So it went blood river and then raining down frogs? Explanation: the second plague brought frogs hopping into every nook and cranny of Egypt. These little amphibians were everywhere in houses, beds, kitchens, you name it. If the Egyptians weren't fans of frogs before, they definitely weren't after this. Were they fans of frogs? I enjoy frogs. Actually, this would be probably the least bad plague. And I heard they were raining down. Is that what you heard, or did you hear that they hopped into Egypt? Let me know in the comments. What was the third plague that afflicted Egypt? All right, so number three, what was the third plague that afflicted Egypt? A, flies. B, boils. C, gnats or lice. D, darkness. All right, well, if it's gnats or lice. Interesting. I wonder if the frogs could eat the gnats. I wonder if that kind of helped. The third plague brought gnats or lice, depending on the translation, that covered people and animals alike. These tiny, irritating insects were impossible to avoid, making the Egyptians' lives itchy and miserable. That sounds terrible. And it sounds like they're maybe too small for the frogs to eat. Because that would be actually kind of perfect if it was like the second plague was frogs and the third plague was like flies. That might work out. All right, number four. Which plague involved swarms of flies? A, the first plague. B, the fourth plague. C, the sixth plague. Or D, the eighth plague. Swarms of flies. Ooh, I wonder if they're the kind of flies that bite you too, like horse flies bite. I wonder if these are like slow flying flies. B, fourth plague. Whoa. So after the gnats and lice, it was flies. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies that invaded Egyptian homes and lands. These weren't your average house flies, oh no. They were swarming, biting, and relentless, making life unbearable for the Egyptians. Oh, that's what I was worried about. They sound like horse flies. Those guys bite, they have pinchers on them. It's terrible. All right, number five. What was the fifth plague that struck Egypt? What was the fifth plague that struck Egypt? Was it A, hail, B, darkness, C, death of livestock, or D, locusts? Man, death of livestock would be terrible. Honestly, all these would be bad, but I'd feel like it was your family or something, right? If all your livestock died. All right, number C, death of livestock. Oh no, it was that. That'd be terrible. The fifth plague caused the death of the Egyptians' livestock, including horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. This was a devastating blow to Egypt's economy and food supply, as these animals were essential for transportation, agriculture, and food and friendship. Your horse? Come on. Camels are cool. Number six, which plague afflicted the Egyptians with painful boils? Ooh, sounds bad. A, the second plague. B, the sixth plague. C, the seventh plague. Or D, the ninth plague. Painful boils. Oh man. B, the sixth plague. Oh, honestly, these sound terrible. I get why they call them plagues. The sixth plague brought painful boils that broke out on the skin of the Egyptians and their animals. This was no ordinary rash. It was so severe that even the magicians who tried to replicate Moses' miracles couldn't stand before Pharaoh because they were covered in boils. Oof. They couldn't even stand in front of him. Number 7, which plague brought a destructive hailstorm to Egypt? Man. A, the third plague. B, the fifth plague. C, the seventh plague. Or D, the ninth plague. Which plague brought a destructive hailstorm to Egypt? Answer is C, the seventh plague. The seventh plague unleashed a terrifying hailstorm that destroyed crops, trees, and anything left outside. This wasn't just a drizzle of ice, it was a storm so intense that it left Egypt's landscape shattered and ruined. Oh man, do you think they got hail there often? I imagine it being hot, so this is probably very unexpected if it's like that. Number 8, which plague involved locusts that devoured all the crops? A, the eighth plague. B, the sixth plague. C, the fourth plague. Or D, the second plague. Which plague involved locusts that devoured all of the crops? A, the eighth plague. Ooh, I actually kind of like grasshoppers. I wonder if these are like bigger than that. The Egyptian plague brought locusts that swarmed over Egypt, devouring every green thing in their path. If the Egyptians thought they had any crops left after the hailstorm, the locusts quickly took care of that, leaving the land barren and the people hungry. Man, and when you see a swarm of them coming, I bet that's terrifying. What is the ninth plague that struck Egypt? Was it A, frogs? B, darkness? C, boils? D, death of the firstborn? That one's heavy. Answer is B, darkness. Explanation: the ninth plague brought darkness so thick it could be felt. For 3 days, Egypt was plunged into complete darkness, but the Israelites had light where they lived. It was a supernatural blackout that added to the growing fear and desperation in Egypt. Yeah, can imagine. That would be freaky. 3 days of darkness, thick darkness. Which of the final plague led Pharaoh to release the Israelites? Which of the final plagues, which final plague that led Pharaoh to release the Israelites? Was it A, hail, B, locusts, C, darkness, or D, death of the firstborn? D, death of the firstborn. That sounds like the worst one. In my opinion, that sounds like the worst of the plagues. The 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the most devastating. Yep. Every Egyptian household, from the palace to the poorest home, experienced the loss of their firstborn son. This tragic event finally broke Pharaoh's resistance, leading him to release the Israelites, but not before a dramatic pursuit. We are halfway done. How are you doing? Are you 10 for 10? And even if you're not, don't worry. It's not about being perfect, because if you were to retake those 10 questions, I bet you'd get a perfect score. I bet you learned a little something, had a little fun along the way, so thank you. And let's continue this amazing quiz. Number 11. Which plague caused the Nile River to stink because of dead fish? Ooh. Was it A, the first plague, B, the second plague, C, the third plague, or D, the fourth plague? Which plague caused the Nile River to stink because of dead fish? It was A, the first plague. So they can't live in blood. Interesting. When the Nile River was turned into blood during the first plague, it wasn't just about the water changing color. The river began to stink because of all the dead fish, making the situation even more unbearable. Imagine your main water source turning into a fishy smelling mess. Ugh. Which plague caused frogs to invade every part of Egyptian homes? Do you remember this? You should know this one from the first 10. All right. A, first plague. B, second plague. C, third plague. Or D, the eighth plague. Answer is B, the second plague. The second plague brought frogs into every corner of Egyptian life, from their kitchens to their bedrooms. Frogs were everywhere, and while they're cute in small numbers, this many would drive anyone hopping mad. Okay. We're using puns now? That's the level we're going to? I'm just kidding. I love puns. All right, number 13. Which plague specifically affected only the Egyptians, sparing the Israelites? Okay, was it A, the frogs, B, boils, C, darkness, or D, flies? Okay, I don't think it's darkness. Or maybe what? The boils, maybe? That'd be a good one to miss, right? I would take darkness over boils. It's D, the flies. Flies knew. See the explanation. The fourth plague, which brought swarms of flies, only affected the Egyptians. The land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was spared. This distinction made it clear that God was protecting his people while delivering judgment on Egypt. Flies. What happened to the crops during the plague of hail? A. They were eaten by locusts. B. They were washed away. C. They were burned by fire from heaven. D. They were destroyed by the hail. All right, I think we can all safely assume that what happened during the crops was D. They were destroyed by hail. Makes sense. The seventh plague brought a hailstorm so severe that it flattened the crops and shattered trees. It wasn't just hail, it was a combination of fire and ice that devastated Egypt's agriculture, leaving little behind for the people to eat. Wow, fire and ice. That's not a normal hailstorm. All right, number 15. Which plague involved the Egyptian magicians acknowledging God's power? Okay, so which plague involved the Egyptian magicians acknowledging God's power? Was it A, the first plague, B, the second plague, C, the third plague, or D, the fifth plague? Egyptian magicians. It's a fun combination of words. It's C, the third plague. By the time the third plague, gnats or lice, struck, the Egyptian magicians threw in the towel and admitted, "This is the finger of God." They couldn't replicate the miracle, recognizing that they were dealing with a power far greater than their own. Egyptian magician show would be something I would watch. What was the first plague that Pharaoh's magicians could not replicate? What was the first plague that Pharaoh's magicians could not replicate? Was it A, the first plague, the blood? B, the frogs? Was it C, the gnats? Or D, the flies? All right. The blood would be difficult. The very first plague would be very difficult to replicate. It was C, the gnats. Could not, so they could replicate the first. The third plague of gnats was the first that the Pharaoh's magicians couldn't replicate. Their failure to produce gnats showed that their magic was no match for the power of God, and even they begin to acknowledge it. So they could do the first two, huh? Okay. Interesting to see how they did that. Number 17, which plague caused the Egyptians to suffer from painful boils? The A, the sixth plague, B, the seventh plague, C, the eighth plague, or D, the ninth plague. This one is kind of a freebie if you remember the first 10. Just seeing if you cemented in there. Did you really learn anything from the first 10? Did you already know this? It's A, the sixth plague. The sixth plague brought painful boils that erupted on the skin of both people and animals. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a painful and humiliating affliction that showed the physical toll of resisting God's commands. Sounds horrible. What did Pharaoh promise after the plague of locusts? What did Pharaoh promise after the plague of locusts? A, to release the Israelites immediately. B, to reduce the Israelites' workload. C, to let only the men go worship. D, to end slavery in Egypt. C, to let only the men go worship. After the eighth plague of locusts, Pharaoh offered to let only the men go worship in the wilderness, trying to negotiate with Moses. But Moses insisted that everyone, men, women, and children, must go, leading to further hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Number 19, during the plague of darkness, how long did Egypt remain in complete darkness? Was it A, 1 day, B, 2 days, C, 3 days, or D, 4 days? During the plague of darkness, a thick darkness, how long did Egypt remain in complete darkness? C, 3 days. The ninth plague brought 3 days of thick darkness over Egypt, so intense that people couldn't see each other or move about. Meanwhile, the Israelites had light where they lived, showing once again that God was protecting his people. What was the final plague that struck down the firstborn in Egypt? A, the plague of darkness. B, the death of the firstborn. C, the plague of boils. Or D, the plague of locusts. What was the final plague that struck down the firstborn in Egypt? The answer is B, the death of the firstborn. One of the most terrible. I'd probably say this is the worst one out of all of them. The 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the most devastating. Every firstborn son in Egypt died, from the Pharaoh's household to the lowest servants, finally breaking Pharaoh's resistance and leading to the release of the Israelites. Wow, that's devastating. Honestly, that's insane. Way to go, though. You are amazing. Please comment your score below. Out of 20, how many did you get? And please don't feel bad if it wasn't a perfect score. It's not about being perfect. It's about having fun, learning a little bit, getting closer to God, and just spending your day in the best way. So I thank you, and I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you the next time on